My hands were shaking as I stared at the notification on my phone. Another complaint. Another fine. Another reason why Margaret Whitfield, our HOA president, wanted to make my life a living hell. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Mom, what's wrong? My 17-year-old son Jake looked up from his laptop, concern creasing his features. The same features that reminded me so much of his father, the father he'd never get to meet because of a drunk driver 3 years ago. I couldn't speak. The words on the screen blurred through my tears. Violation notice. Unauthorized use of community Wi-Fi network. Fine, $500. Repeat offense may result in legal action. She's lost her mind, I whispered, my voice cracking. She's actually lost her mind. Jake was beside me in an instant, reading over my shoulder. His face darkened, an expression I'd seen too often since David's death, when my gentle boy had to grow up too fast, become the man of the house before he was ready. This is about the Wi-Fi password change, isn't it? He said quietly. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. 3 months ago, we discovered that Margaret had somehow gotten our Wi-Fi password and was using our internet connection. When confronted, she claimed it was her right as HOA president to monitor suspicious activity. The sheer audacity had left me speechless. So Jake, my brilliant, tech-savvy son, had changed the password. A simple act of protecting what was ours. And now she was retaliating with fabricated violations, made-up fines, and threats that kept me awake at night. Mom, look at me. Jake's voice was steady, mature beyond his years. We're not going to let her win. Not after everything we've been through. But I was tired. God, I was so tired. After David's death, I'd thought the worst was behind us. We'd moved to Willowbrook Estates thinking it would be a fresh start. A quiet, safe community where Jake could finish high school and I could rebuild our lives. Instead, we'd walked into a nightmare orchestrated by a woman who seemed to take pleasure in other people's pain. She wants us gone, Jake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She's going to keep filing complaints until we can't afford to fight anymore. Then we'll find another way to fight, he replied, his jaw set with determination. I've been working on something. Something that might help us understand why she's targeting us specifically. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Jake glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. Mom, I don't think Margaret's just being a difficult neighbor. I think there's something else going on. Something bigger. Before I could ask what he meant, the doorbell rang. Its sharp tone cut through the air like a knife, making both of us jump. We looked at each other, the same thought crossing both our minds. Stay here, I said, but Jake was already following me to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see Margaret Whitfield standing on our porch, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, her arms crossed in that familiar pose of self-righteous indignation. Behind her stood 2 men in dark suits, strangers I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs. Who are those men with her? Jake peered through the side window. I don't know, but Mom, look at their car. I followed his gaze to the black sedan parked in our driveway. Government plates. My blood ran cold. Margaret knocked again, more aggressively this time. Mrs. Coleman. I know you're in there. We need to talk. We don't have to open the door, Jake whispered. But something in Margaret's tone was different. This wasn't her usual entitled demanding. There was an edge of panic, of desperation that I'd never heard before. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door but kept the chain engaged, opening it just enough to see Margaret's face. What I saw there surprised me. She looked scared. Margaret, what do you want? And who are these men? We need to talk, she said again, her voice urgent. About your husband. About why you really moved here. The words hit me like a physical blow. My husband is dead. You know that. Mrs. Coleman, one of the men stepped forward, flashing a badge. FBI. We need to speak with you about David Coleman and the files he left behind. Files? What files? David had been an accountant, not some secret agent. But as I looked at Margaret's terrified face, a horrible realization began to dawn on me. You knew, I whispered, staring at her. You knew who David was. Margaret's composure cracked. Let us in, Sarah. Please. Your son is in danger. We all are. Jake moved closer to me, his protective instinct kicking in. Mom, don't. The Wi-Fi monitoring, the FBI agent continued, his voice calm but urgent. Mrs. Whitfield was following our instructions. Your husband hid something in your home network before he died. Something that very dangerous people are looking for. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. That's impossible. David died in a car accident. A drunk driver. There was no drunk driver, Margaret said, her voice breaking. Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But David was killed because of what he discovered. The chain felt impossibly heavy as I fumbled to unlatch it. Jake's hand found mine, squeezing tight, and I drew strength from his touch. Whatever was coming, we'd face it together. As I opened the door wider, I couldn't help but think about how this moment would change everything. 3 months of thinking Margaret was just a petty tyrant, when she'd actually been trying to protect us. 3 years of believing David's death was a tragic accident, when it was something far worse. Come in, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I want the truth. All of it. The FBI agent nodded grimly. Mrs. Coleman, your husband stumbled onto one of the largest financial conspiracies in recent history. And the people behind it think you have evidence that could bring them down. As they filed into my living room, Margaret avoiding my eyes, the agents scanning our home with professional assessment, I realized that our quiet life in Willowbrook Estates had been an illusion. We'd never been safe here. We'd been hiding in plain sight, and now our time was up. What kind of evidence? Jake asked, his voice tight with controlled fear. The second agent, who'd remained silent until now, spoke up. Financial records. Account numbers. Names of people in very high places who don't want their involvement known. And you think this evidence is hidden in our Wi-Fi network? I asked, still struggling to process everything. Margaret finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, I never wanted to spy on you. But when they told me what David had been working on, what he'd discovered, I thought if I could find the files first, I could protect you and Jake. I thought I could handle this quietly. But you couldn't, the first agent said grimly. Because 3 days ago, someone hacked into the community's main server trying to access your home network. Someone who's willing to kill to get what they want. Jake's hand tightened on mine. Mom, this is why I've been monitoring our network security. I thought someone was trying to hack us, but I didn't know why. You knew. I turned to stare at my son. You knew someone was trying to hack us and you didn't tell me? I didn't want to worry you more than you already were, he said defensively. Besides, I set up some pretty good defenses. But... He paused, looking at the agents. If these people killed my dad, then my firewalls aren't going to be enough, are they? The second agent shook his head. Son, the people we're dealing with have resources you can't imagine. Military-grade cyber warfare capabilities. The only reason they haven't gotten through yet is because your father was smarter than we gave him credit for. What do you mean? I asked. He didn't just hide the files in your network, Margaret said quietly. He encrypted them using something called a family cipher. A code that can only be unlocked by people who knew him intimately. His family. I felt sick. So they need us alive to get the information. For now, the first agent confirmed. But once they have what they want. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake and I would become liabilities to be eliminated. There has to be something we can do, I said desperately. Some way to fight back. Jake suddenly straightened, his eyes lighting up with an idea. Actually, there might be. Mom, remember Dad's old laptop? The one in the garage that never seemed to work right? I nodded slowly. David had kept that ancient thing for years, claiming it had sentimental value even though it barely functioned. What if it wasn't broken? Jake continued, his voice gaining excitement. What if Dad programmed it to look broken but it was actually running background processes? What if that's where the real files are? The agents exchanged glances. That's actually not a bad theory, the first one admitted. Your father was paranoid enough to create multiple backup systems. Margaret wiped her eyes, some of her old authority returning. Then we need to get to that laptop before they do. They're already here, the second agent said grimly, pulling out his phone. I'm getting reports of suspicious vehicles in the neighborhood. We need to move now. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Jake ran to grab the laptop from the garage while the agents secured the perimeter. Margaret stayed with me, and for the first time since we'd moved here, I saw her not as the enemy, but as a frightened woman who'd been trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. Sarah, she said quietly, I know you have every reason to hate me. The complaints, the fines, the constant harassment. I thought if I made your life difficult enough, you'd move away voluntarily. I thought I could keep you safe by making you leave. But we didn't leave, I pointed out. She smiled sadly. No, you didn't. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. Both of you. Jake returned with the laptop, his face flushed with adrenaline. I think I can crack whatever Dad did to make it look broken. But I'll need time. Time we don't have, the first agent said, peering out the window. There's a van parked at the end of the street that wasn't there 10 minutes ago. My heart raced. What do? We leave, Margaret said firmly. My house has a safe room that David helped me install last year. We can hold out there while Jake works on the laptop. I stared at her in shock. David helped you install a safe room? When? About 6 months before he died, she admitted. He said he was worried about something he'd discovered at work. He made me promise to look after you and Jake if anything happened to him. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of a husband I'd never really known. David hadn't just been an accountant, he'd been preparing for war. Mom, Jake interrupted urgently, we need to go. Now. Through the window, I could see men in dark clothing moving between the houses. They weren't trying to hide anymore, which meant they were confident in their ability to handle whatever resistance we might offer. We gathered what we could, Jake's laptop, David's laptop, some basic supplies, and prepared to make a run for Margaret's house. As we reached the back door, I turned to take one last look at the home where Jake and I had tried to rebuild our lives. We'll come back, Jake said quietly, reading my thoughts. Once this is over, we'll come back. But as we slipped out into the fading daylight, moving like shadows between the perfectly manicured yards of Willowbrook Estates, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Margaret's safe room turned out to be more sophisticated than I'd imagined. A hidden basement-level access through a bookshelf in her study, equipped with communication equipment, food supplies, and enough computing power to run a small business. David designed most of this, Margaret explained as we settled in. He said if things went bad, this would be our command center. Jake immediately set up both laptops, his fingers flying over the keyboards with practiced ease. Mom, I need you to think about Dad's favorite things. Numbers, dates, phrases, anything he might have used as part of an encryption key. I racked my brain trying to remember details about the man I'd loved but apparently never fully understood. Our anniversary, June 15th. Your birthday. His mother's maiden name. What about less obvious things? The FBI agent suggested. Inside jokes, favorite movies, books. He used to say I was his lucky number 7, I remembered suddenly. Because we met on the 7th of the month and I was wearing a jersey with the number 7. Jake's eyes lit up. That's good. What else? For the next hour, we worked together to piece together the fragments of David's hidden life. With each password attempt, each small breakthrough, the laptop revealed more of its secrets. Financial records, yes, but also correspondence with FBI agents, detailed notes about money laundering operations, and a list of names that made the agents whistle in surprise. Your husband was building a case against some very powerful people, the first agent said grimly. Senators, business leaders, foreign operatives, this goes all the way to the top. But why didn't he go to the authorities? I asked. He did, Margaret said quietly. He went to me first because he wasn't sure who else he could trust. The corruption went deep into law enforcement. He needed proof before he could act. Jake suddenly straightened. Mom, look at this. On the screen was a video file labeled for Sarah and Jake. With trembling fingers I clicked play. David's face appeared on the screen, looking tired but determined. He was sitting in his home office, the same room where he'd spent countless evenings working late. If you're watching this, his recorded voice said, then something has happened to me and you're in danger. Sarah, my beautiful wife, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. I'm sorry I had to lie about working late, about business trips that weren't really business trips. Tears streamed down my face as I watched my husband, my dead husband, explain the conspiracy he'd uncovered. Millions of dollars in stolen funds, money meant for veterans programs and disaster relief being funneled into private accounts. Politicians being bought and sold like commodities. I've documented everything, David continued. Account numbers, transaction records, recordings of conversations. It's all here, encrypted and hidden where only my family can find it. Jake, son, I know you're smart enough to figure out my system. And Sarah, I know you're strong enough to see this through. The video paused as Jake wiped his eyes. Dad left us instructions, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not just for finding the evidence, but for what to do with it. What does he want us to do? I asked. Publish everything, Jake replied. He set up a dead man's switch, a program that will automatically release all the evidence to every major news outlet in the country if we activate it. The implications were staggering. We weren't just fighting for our lives anymore, we were potentially about to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. The question is, the FBI agent said slowly, are you willing to push that button? Because once you do, there's no going back. These people will never stop hunting you. I looked at Jake, my son who'd grown up too fast, who'd lost his father to greed and corruption. I thought about David, who died trying to do the right thing. I thought about all the other families who'd suffered because of the crimes these people had committed. They're already hunting us, I said firmly. At least this way we fight back. Margaret nodded approvingly. Your husband would be proud. Jake's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Are you sure, Mom? Once I send this, our lives will never be normal again. I reached over and covered his hand with mine. Sweetheart, our lives stopped being normal the day your father discovered the truth. But maybe now, other families won't have to go through what we have. Together we pressed the enter key. Within minutes, alerts began flooding the communication equipment in Margaret's safe room. News channels picking up the story. Government agencies scrambling to respond. The beginning of what would become one of the largest political scandals in recent history. It's done, Jake said quietly. Through the safe room's security monitors, we could see chaos erupting in the neighborhood above. Black vehicles racing away, government agents securing the area, news vans already arriving despite the late hour. What happens now? I asked. The FBI agent smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Now, Mrs. Coleman, you and your son become the most protected witnesses in the country. And the people who killed your husband finally face justice. As I held Jake close, watching the world change through grainy security footage, I realized that David had given us one final gift. Not just the truth but the power to act on it. The power to turn our grief into something meaningful. Margaret was right. David would have been proud. But more than that, I was proud. Proud of Jake for his courage and intelligence. Proud of myself for finding strength I didn't know I had. And yes, even proud of Margaret, who'd risked everything to protect a family she barely knew because a dead man had asked her to. The Wi-Fi password that had started this whole nightmare seemed so trivial now. But in a way, that simple act of changing a password had been the first step in uncovering the truth. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance lead to the biggest revelations. As dawn broke over Willowbrook Estates, our quiet suburban neighborhood transformed into ground zero for a story that would reshape American politics. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like David was truly at rest. The truth was finally free.